The Young and the Restless Spoilers. In the once idyllic city of Nice, a dark storm has been brewing ever since the sudden and tragic death of Chance Chancellor. Without his steady hand to uphold justice, without the presence of someone who truly believed in the law and stood between chaos and order, the city has devolved into something unrecognizable. Nice was never perfect, but with Chance around, there was still a sliver of structure, of hope, of decency. Now, that fragile thread has snapped. What remains is a city crawling with unchecked ambition, veiled threats, and a descent into anarchy so thick it clings to the very air. The vacuum left behind has not gone unnoticed, and unfortunately, it hasn't remained unfilled by any sense of morality or heroism. No, what has taken its place is far worse. In the shadows of Chance's absence, Cain Ashby has risen as a leader, not as a hero, but as a man consumed by darkness, wielding power with no accountability. The Cain who once walked a fine line between redemption and temptation has now fully surrendered to his darker instincts. Whatever trace of conscience that remained has long been buried beneath the weight of power, greed, and ego. There are no limits to what he will do. He manipulates, he coerces, he destroys. He has become judge, jury, and executioner in a city where fear now roams free. And yet, just when viewers were resigning themselves to this twisted new world, a shockwave reverberated through the digital universe. A photo surfaced. At first, many questioned its authenticity, thinking it was perhaps an old memory or a cleverly crafted fan edit. But the image was far too real to be dismissed. Rey Rosales and Paul Williams, two figures thought to be lost to time, were seen together on set, unmistakably in costume, unmistakably present. The fans lost their collective minds. How could this be? Could the producers truly be answering the calls that have echoed in the fandom for months now, years? The demand has never waned. The voices of viewers old and new have cried out, "Bring Rey back, bring Paul back." They were the men who held the line when darkness threatened to overrun Genoa City. They were the ones who stood for integrity, for loyalty, for justice, and not only by the letter of the law, but by its spirit. The idea of Rey Rosales and Paul Williams returning together isn't just a nostalgia trip, it's potentially the most explosive development Y&R has seen in years. It's not just about familiar faces or satisfying fan service. It's about restoring a moral compass that the show has been sorely lacking in recent arcs. With Cain becoming a tyrant cloaked in charm and manipulation, the absence of any real counterforce has left viewers gasping for someone to rise up and challenge the darkness. That someone here, perhaps this choix might just be Rey and Paul. Imagine the power of that pairing. Rey, the sharp, justice-driven detective whose unfinished business has left a lingering void. Paul, the seasoned professional whose history with the city runs deep, who understands the undercurrents and can see through the lies. Together, they don't just balance each other, they amplify what's best in one another. Rey brings the fire of the new generation, the passion, the grit. Paul brings wisdom, patience, and a deep emotional connection to the town's legacy. If they were to return, it wouldn't simply be a cameo, it would be a reckoning. And perhaps that is precisely what Nice and Genoa City needs right now. Cain has become more than just a villain. He has taken advantage of every crack in the system, every moment of silence, every lapse in judgment by others. He has created alliances rooted in fear and confusion. There's no one left to question him, no one left to draw a line in the sand. But imagine the tide turning. Imagine Rey and Paul walking back into the chaos, not to clean up someone else's mess quietly, but to expose every dark corner, to challenge every crooked alliance, to shine a light so bright even Cain can no longer operate in the shadows. Their return would not just be symbolic, it would be transformative. What's even more exciting is the emotional weight this return would carry. Paul has history with nearly everyone. He understands the tangled web that connects families, rivals, lovers, and enemies. He's not just a man in uniforms, a living archive of Genoa City's soul. Rey, on the other hand, left abruptly with so much unresolved. There was pain, betrayal, love unspoken, and justice denied. A return offers the perfect opportunity to revisit those emotional threads, to heal or deepen wounds, to unearth secrets long buried. And let's not forget what a return means for the younger generation. Without mentors, without lawmen who lead by example, they've floundered. But imagine Noah, Kyle, Summer, even Adam Meach forced to reckon with what accountability looks like when it's personified by Rey and Paul. Imagine Sharon confronting her past with Rey, or Nikki being forced to explain how the city spiraled so far out of control. The drama writes itself and fans can't stop speculating. Social media has become a powder keg of anticipation. The hashtags are trending. The threads are filled with wild theories, wish lists, and please, give us back Paul and Rey. Make Y&R City safe again. Kane's reign must end. The noise has been deafening. And for once, it appears that the powers behind the scenes are listening. The fact that a photo was leaked or intentionally released has ignited a movement. Some believe it was no accident. Some believe it was the first breadcrumb in a calculated campaign to restore balance to a universe that had drifted too far into the morally gray. The timing is no coincidence, with the 2025 arcs pushing boundaries in betrayal, power plays, and blurred ethics. It makes perfect sense to inject characters who serve as anchors of justice, morality, and resilience. But beyond the plot and the fanfare lies the deeper truth soap operas survive not just on twists and cliffhangers, but on the emotional loyalty of their audience. Bringing back Rey and Paul isn't just a plot decision, it's a love letter. It's an acknowledgement that some characters never stop mattering, that some voices are too important to silence, that some legacies are meant to be honored rather than forgotten. It's about giving the viewers a reason to believe again, to root for justice, to invest in battles that feel worth fighting. It's about reminding everyone that even in a city as broken as Nice, heroes can rise again. That goodness the Go Knight's just been waiting for the right moment to reappear. And maybe, just maybe, that moment is now. So, the question remains, are you ready for Rey and Paul? Are you ready for a showdown that pits darkness against honor, chaos against discipline, manipulation against truth? Are you ready to see Kane Ashby so confident in his untouchability face the reckoning he never expected? Because if the image was real, if the producers truly have answered the call, then the war for the soul of Y&R City is about to begin. And this time, the good guys are coming back with a vengeance. At the Abbott residence, the evening air was thick with tension and unspoken questions. Billy Abbott had grown used to chaos knocking on his front door, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight of Kane Ashby standing there with an expression not of arrogance or manipulation, but of clarity, or something that almost resembled resignation. It had been weeks of anticipation, of shadow games and backroom whispers, as Kane orchestrated what everyone believed was his next major move to take over Chancellor. The threat was real, and Billy had been preparing for war. Yet here Kane stood, without fanfare, without a briefcase full of contracts, and with nothing but the weight of his own truth. Billy, naturally suspicious, kept his guard up, not letting the surprise dull his instincts. But what came next left him with more questions than answers. Kane didn't pace. He didn't manipulate the conversation like he usually did. Instead, he admitted calmly, almost to come with it, he was stepping away from the takeover plan. Chancellor, he said, was no longer in his crosshairs. It was as if he was offering Billy a prize he hadn't won, surrendering without ever putting up a fight. Billy's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a fool, and he knew Kane didn't do anything without purpose. Yet the sincerity in Kane's voice, the absence of malice, forced Billy to pause. Kane declared that if Billy truly wanted Chancellor, he should go for it. He called it a fair target, something worth fighting for if Billy had the stomach to see it through. But he wouldn't be a part of it. Not anymore. Billy asked the only question that made sense. Why? Why now? Why this sudden change of heart after so much maneuvering, so much manipulation, so much noise? And it was then that Kane's veneer cracked, just slightly. He spoke of his children not as shields to justify his actions, but as the reason he had to look at himself in the mirror and finally see the damage. The ambition that once burned so bright now seemed hollow when placed next to the reality of what he had cost others, especially those he claimed to love. He mentioned Lily, the woman he had once wanted to build a legacy for. He had believed that perhaps foolishly that he could reshape Chancellor in her name, make it a gift, a tribute, a way to prove he was still worth something in her eyes. But now, he understood the bitter truth. You cannot give someone something they do not want, no matter how grand the gesture. If it's not aligned with the recipient's desire, it's just a selfish attempt at redemption dressed in the illusion of generosity. There was no argument from Billy, only a stunned silence. Kane didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't seek validation. He left as quietly as he came. And in his wake, he left Billy with a cascade of doubts. Because Billy, ever the strategist, knew that Kane didn't just walk away from a power play without a reason. And this confession, this moment of self-awareness could either be the beginning of Kane's transformation or the most dangerous misdirection yet. As Kane disappeared down the path, Sally's specter arrived home. Sensing the tension immediately, she spotted the way Billy's posture hadn't relaxed, the furrows still etched into his brow. So she asked the obvious, what was Kane doing here? Billy recounted everything, every word, every nuance, every unexpected turn in the conversation. And Sally, sharp and unafraid to voice what others only dared to think, immediately smelled smoke. This wasn't closure. This wasn't the end of Kane's chapter. This was a reset, a pivot, a strategic withdrawal cloaked in emotional language. She warned Billy not to take anything at face value, because if Kane had truly abandoned the Chancellor play, then what was he aiming for next? Her instincts told her something darker was unfolding, something that wasn't about business or corporations, but about control, about chaos. And Billy, now infected by that suspicion, couldn't help but consider the broader implications. If Kane's departure from Chancellor was genuine, then it could clear the path for Billy to rise it to what cost. What if Kane was actually setting him up as the perfect pawn in a larger war? What if by stepping back, he was making Billy the threat, the disruptor, the rogue agent the Newmans would fixate on? The Newman family was always sensitive to power plays, especially those involving Chancellor, which once belonged to their own Catherine. If Billy suddenly moved in to claim it, even with the best intentions, it would trigger alarms. It would create tension. And while the Newmans were distracted, divided, trying to neutralize Billy, Kane would be free to operate in the shadows unwatched, unbothered, and unstoppable. Sally's mind raced. Her journalistic instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a personal betrayal waiting to happen. This was a story, a massive one. If they could uncover what Kane was truly doing, they could get ahead of him. For Unsebit Communications could have its first explosive headline, the kind that sets the tone for a media empire, the kind that shakes Genoa City to its core. She suggested they start watching Kane's moves closely, not through the obvious channels, but by digging into the spaces he usually hid his whole company's anonymous trusts, unusual property acquisitions. There had to be something. There always was with Kane. The room became a war room. Billy and Sally weren't just partners in life, they were partners in strategy now. Sally's determination grew. She wouldn't let this be another instance where they were blindsided. If Kane thought he could manipulate the chessboard again, he was going to learn that this time they were ready. But deep down, Billy still wrestled with one last possibility. What if Kane really had changed? What if this was, in some twisted way, his way of bowing out? But even that thought was a trap, because Kane didn't change. He adapted, he evolved, he played a longer game than most were willing to entertain. And Billy knew that, even if no one else did. The days ahead would demand vigilance. They would need to talk to Lily, to Devon, to anyone who might have noticed a shift in Kane's demeanor. Every connection, every whisper, every financial transaction would matter now, because this wasn't just about Chancellor. It wasn't even just about Billy. This was about the future of the Abbott family, the Newman Empire, and the very balance of power in Genoa City. And while Kane might have walked away from the battlefield, He had not left the war. He was simply waiting for his enemies to celebrate too soon. But this time, Billy wasn't going to let his guard down. He had learned too much, lost too much, and with Sally at his side, he was more dangerous than he had ever been before. Because when the truth finally surfaced when the curtain was pulled back on Kane's real agent date would be Sally who broke the story. And it would be Billy who made sure Kane never had the chance to rewrite the ending again.